Star Wars The Force Awakens. If you either love it or hate it, you have to admit they did a pretty good job of getting people excited about Star Wars again and bringing in a whole new generation of fans. When it all started back in 2012, Disney bought Lucasfilm for $4.5 billion. They had to make this film good and bring the fandom back and make a profit at the box office. And let's get real, of course this film was going to make a profit, but it doesn't mean it was going to be good and people were going to like it. Because ever since the prequels, it seems like Star Wars has kind of stayed quiet. So they had to make this film good. So who's someone who can direct a film in space? J.J. Abrams, the guy who directed a couple of Star Trek movies. Yeah, perfect choice. And I think he did a pretty good job. And they gave him complete creative control over the movie, so he could do whatever he wanted to expand on the universe. And this was quite a change to not see George Lucas in the making of it. And I'm not saying that George Lucas didn't try to add to the story, because before he handed Lucasfilm over, he gave Disney a bunch of story ideas to use. And you could say that Disney took these story ideas into consideration. Yeah, nah, they didn't even really use much of it. They wanted to make their own story. And don't even say that, oh, it's just a remake of A New Hope. Now, first off, yes, this film does have a few similarities of A New Hope, but they had to play it safe for this one. They couldn't just go do something completely out of the box, because they would have got even more hate for doing something different than the same. And then when they go to do something different for the next one, half the fans hate it, but that's a different movie for a different day. So let's talk about casting. I think the film is cast very well, and I like how they brought back the three leads from the original trilogy and did it in a way that they were being introduced again to the audience. And they don't take away from the new characters, but they still have a big impact on the story. Luke is hardly in it, but a lot of the movie is the Resistance trying to find him so they can bring him back so they can take down the First Order. Leia is the leader of the rebellion, and I liked seeing a strong character from the original trilogy be in charge. And Han is basically with the whole story, and has a big impact on the overall story as a whole. But let's talk about Rey. Now, Rey is basically an orphan who was stuck on a desert planet with the hope of one day her parents will come back. She might seem a bit like Luke, but they are completely different. Luke wants to leave his planet, and Rey doesn't. And I think Rey is a great main character, and carries on the story really well, and is a perfect lead in a new Star Wars movie. But she isn't the only main character in this movie, because there is Finn. Finn might go down as being one of the best characters that Star Wars has ever seen, because Finn is a stormtrooper. Stormtroopers were always known as these guys with terrible aim and were just these disposable things that no one paid even much attention to. And to know that stormtroopers were ripped from their families at a young age makes Finn's arc one of the best. It's just such a shame that Finn was sidelined in later films, because he's just as important as Rey. So Finn helps this guy called Poe escape, and at this point in the trilogy, I wouldn't call Poe a main character, but definitely has a big impact on the story. Finn and Poe steal a TIE fighter and land on the planet that Rey is on, and Finn finds her, and that is basically where the story takes off. The story is pretty simple to follow, and out of all of the Star Wars movies, it's the easiest to understand. It's basically the Resistance trying to find Luke Skywalker and bring him back so he can help defeat the First Order. And the whole thing with trying to blow up Starkiller Base only becomes important at the end when they have to rescue Rey. However, this movie has a lot of coincidences. But if you're watching this movie for the first time, I don't think you even really notice. It's just a fun movie that gets you back into Star Wars. I don't mind Kylo Ren. He's not as good as some of the other Star Wars villains, but I like watching him on screen. At times he can be a bit whiny, but I like how he's torn between his family and the dark side, and wanting to be like his grandfather, Vader. I never really gave Snoke a second thought when I watched this movie for the first time. I really just saw him as the leader of the bad guys who just gave a few scary lines to move the plot forward. The effects in this movie look really good too. Because back in the late 70s and early 80s when the original trilogy came out, effects were just starting to become a reliable way of filmmaking, and were just starting out. And then when they released the prequels, they used so much green screen and CGI to the point where it just looks fake. And now with the new Star Wars movies, the effects look realistic and use them without people noticing to make Star Wars universe feel bigger. But no Star Wars movie is perfect. And this movie does have a few hit and miss moments, like BB-8. Now I am kind of growing to like BB-8 more, but I think it leaves R2-D2 in the dark. And this is a common factor with this trilogy. R2-D2 has nothing to do until the end of the movie, where he suddenly wakes up and shows the last piece of his map so we can connect it with the part of BB-8's, and now Rey can go find Luke, and that's where the movie ends, on a cliffhanger. Literally. And even though there are new fans of these movies, they should make this trilogy something that the new fans can enjoy, not just lots of references to the older films. Star Wars was meant for kids. From the very start, no matter how violent it could get, the focus was always on a younger audience. And I'm not saying that grown-ups can't like them as well, because they're for anyone, but you can't just please the original fans. Because there are always going to be new Star Wars movies coming out in the future, and they can't just be pleasing the old fans. It's like they're saying, hey, you like the older Star Wars movies? Well, here's a bunch of references in your face. A few references are okay, but mate, I don't mind the whole story technique of A New Hope. That's just the normal Star Wars telling way. But make it fresh and enjoyable. That's something that the new fans can like. Because the older fans can be really picky now, and they just want it perfect. But Disney are never going to please the older fans. They just like the original trilogy. And sometimes now, they're even starting to like the prequels. And maybe in the future, people might like this movie as much. But I think this movie is just so underrated. But overall, I think this is a great start to the new Star Wars trilogy, and it sets up a whole new adventure in the Skywalker saga. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe and comment below, and I'll see you next Friday.